Okay, so we've just put this tank in position. The tank has been moved, and what we're trying to do is create places for the corals to go on. So what we're trying to do is create what's called photosynthetic surface area. So we're trying not to do this, we're trying to do that. So there's plenty of room for the light. Now what's going to happen next is, as this tank gets filled up, the rock is going to change color a few times. Now that's very normal, and it's going to start off looking pretty bad. So just expect that. So what we're going to expect is, when we get the tank filled, we're going to get this light brown algae growing everywhere, and it's going to be very frustrating. But as the silicates are consumed, and I would definitely get lots of copepods, because the copepods do a great job consuming the diatoms, which will grow from the silicates in the water. Also putting in phosphate removers that have silicate removal capacity is a very good idea. And then we need to get through this brown phase, and then we get a green phase. So next, all the rock's going to go green, and that's going to look terrible too. Now, increasing the amount of phosphate remover that we're putting in the tank to anticipate this phase is a very good idea. Now, the other thing is that this rock has been used before, so we have to assume that this rock is full of phosphate. Now, this rock is going to leach the phosphate out. So once we have a phosphate filter in there to remove the phosphate, then eventually the porous nature of this rock means that the rock is going to become a sponge or a buffer for future phosphate issues. So while the rock is a disadvantage when it's releasing its phosphate, when you're trying to lower your phosphate, it's an advantage once you do that, because the rock becomes like a buffer. So it sort of fills up with phosphate and then slowly leaches out. So that's something we have to anticipate. So keeping phosphate removers in the tank until the green phase is finished. Now, once the green phase finishes, if we've got nice high calcium, nice high KH, nice high pH, nice high magnesium, then what we want is the coralline algae. The coralline algae means that we're winning. And if we're winning and the water quality is right, then over months, not quickly, over months, you start to form the coralline. And the coralline is that beautiful purpley pink color that you can see on these fake rocks that have been added. Once that's growing, that means we're winning. If we keep the water right and we keep the coralline growing, then the tank is actually growing. That means we're winning. On the other hand, if over time your phosphate levels start going up, your nitrate levels start going up, your pH and KH and so forth start going down, then you're going to go backwards in these cycles, which means you go back to the green algae phase again. And that means that the rock starts filling up with phosphate again. So basically, the way that your rock looks today is a perfect representation of your water quality last month or the month before. And what your rock looks like next month is basically going to be a result of your water quality now. So if you're monitoring your water and you're keeping your water good and you're keeping coralline algae growing, then you're winning. If your levels over time start to deteriorate, the coralline will start to die off, and then either the green algae will come back or you'll get red slime algae. And the red slime algae is this slimy stuff that goes over everything. And if you get that, then that just means your water is not balanced. You've got to suck all that out with a siphon hose, improve your water quality, and in about 4 to 8 weeks, you'll solve that problem. Once the tank starts to mature and your levels are acceptable, then what we want to do is get cleanup crew in there. So we want things like tangs that are going to munch away on algae. We want blennies. We want snails, like strom shells for the sand. We want sand sifting stars for the sand. We want trochus and turbo snails for the algae, and definitely abalone for the algae, and lots of adding copepods. So then, once we've got a good cleanup crew and our levels are right, we can keep our nuisance algae under control, and we can start growing our good coralline algae. In that time, we can start adding our corals, preferably easy corals to keep, and then we're well on our way. Now, if you're deciding what company to use to set your aquarium up, particularly in reference to aquarium shops, what I would recommend you do, which seems to be fairly reliable every single time, is look at the display tanks that the shop has and just consider that that's pretty much what your tank's going to look like. The same as quite often if you want to go to a hairdresser, look at the haircut of the dude that's giving you the haircut. You always end up with the same bloody haircut. If you are looking for an aquarium to get set up, look at the display tanks. And if you're impressed with the display tanks and you think that looks fabulous in my house, then they're probably a good person to use. If you look at the display tank and think, oh, that looks absolutely terrible, then you can probably assume that your tank's going to look absolutely terrible. So now we're putting water in the aquarium. Once the water is 25 degrees, we're going to let it stabilize. And what we're going to want to do is keep the salinity a little bit on the low side, because as we start to put fish in here, you'll find that you get far less issues with pathogens when your salinity is on the low side. So there's many strategies that you can choose to populate your aquarium. One of the most popular strategies is the fish first strategy. Now, to do the fish first strategy, what you need to be aware of is that you're going to have fluctuating salt levels or running lower salt levels while you're stabilizing your fish. Because if you start putting your fish into high salinity, then your osmotic pressure is higher and the immune system typically tends to be lower, and you tend to have more problems with diseases like white spot. So if you run a lower salinity at the start, then you add some nice hardy fish in there, then you wait a full month. You've got to make sure your aquarium is looking great and running well for 1 month. Then you can add a little bit more fish in. And you really want to look at the groups of fish that you add. I'd probably look at something like your tangs first. That's because they're good for scavenging. Fish like clownfish are fairly good early because they're not too expensive and they're really tough. So you want to put your groups in together, because what you don't want to do is put an angel in there and then later on put another angel in there. Otherwise, those two conspecifics will tend to fight. So you want to plan out when your fish are going in. You want to add the fish, wait a month, add the fish, wait a month. Now, during that time, you might decide to put some good value hardy corals in there, but you only want to be putting corals in there that are not super delicate or not super expensive. You don't want to go spending big money on corals until you're finished adding fish, because you don't want to go putting your salinity up and down. Because if you do not have a quarantine tank, then what you're typically going to do is lower the salinity in your main tank, put the new fish in, let the fish establish, slowly raise the salinity back up again. Now, most corals will just not open as well during this period, but most corals are fine. But you don't want anything super hard to keep, and you don't want anything super expensive during this time. So if you just go for corellas and fluffies and zoanthus and leathers and things that are quite simple, then you can't go wrong. So you want to look at the different phases that your aquarium has. Now, on the other hand, if you're going to go for a coral first approach, which means you go heavy on the coral and then add the fish later, you really want to have a quarantine tank, because then you can establish your new fish into the lower salinity. Then you can slowly raise them up in the quarantine tank before you put them into the main tank. So it's really important that you understand what strategy you're going to use. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in trouble.